Section 13 of Gray's Anatomy Part 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by M.L. Cohen. Anatomy of the Human Body Part 4 by Henry Gray. The Fore-brain Part 1. The fore-brain or prosencephalon. The fore-brain or prosencephalon consists of 1. The diencephalon, corresponding in a large measure to the third ventricle and the structures which bound it, and 2. The telencephalon, comprising the largest part of the brain, that is, the cerebral hemispheres. These hemispheres are intimately connected with each other across the middle line, and each contains a large cavity named the lateral ventricle. The lateral ventricles communicate through the intervertebral foramen with the third ventricle, but are separated from each other by a medial septum, the septum pellucidum. This contains a slit-like cavity which does not communicate with the ventricles. The diencephalon. The diencephalon is connected above and in front with the cerebral hemispheres, behind with the midbrain. Its upper surface is concealed by the corpus callosum and is covered by a fold of pia mater named the telechoroidea of the third ventricle. Inferiorly, it reaches to the base of the brain. The diencephalon comprises 1. The thalamencephalon, 2. The pars mammillaris hypothalami, and 3. The posterior part of the third ventricle. For descriptive purposes, however, it is more convenient to consider the whole of the third ventricle and its boundaries together. This necessitates the inclusion under this heading of the pars optica hypothalami and the corresponding part of the third ventricle, structures which properly belong to the telencephalon. The thalamencephalon. The thalamencephalon comprises 1. The thalamus, 2. The metathalamus or corpora geniculata, and 3. The epithalamus, consisting of the trigone habenulae, the pineal body, and the posterior commissure. The thalami, optic thalamus, are 2 large ovoid masses situated one on either side of the third ventricle and reaching for some distance behind that cavity. Each measures about 4 centimeters in length and presents 2 extremities, an anterior and a posterior, and 4 surfaces, superior, inferior, medial, and lateral. The anterior extremity is narrow. It lies close to the middle line and forms the posterior boundary of the interventricular foramen. The posterior extremity is expanded, directed backward and lateralward, and overlaps the superior colliculus. Medially, it presents an angular prominence to pulvinar, which is continued laterally into an oval swelling, the lateral geniculate body, while beneath the pulvinar, but separated from it by the superior brachium, is a second oval swelling, the medial geniculate body. The superior surface is free, slightly convex, and covered by a layer of white substance, termed the stratum zonale. It is separated laterally from the caudate nucleus by a white band, the stria terminalis, and by the terminal vein. It is divided into a medial and a lateral portion by an oblique shallow furrow, which runs from behind forward and medialward and corresponds with the lateral margin of the fornix. The lateral part forms a portion of the floor of the lateral ventricle and is covered by the epithelial lining of this cavity. The medial part is covered by the telechoroidea of the third ventricle and is destitute of an epithelial covering. In front, the superior is separated from the medial surface by a salient margin, the tinea thalami, along which the epithelial lining of the third ventricle is reflected onto the undersurface of the telechoroidea. Behind, it is limited medially by a groove, the sulcus habenulae, which intervenes between it and a small triangular area termed the trigone habenulae. The inferior surface rests upon and is continuous with the upward prolongation of the tegmentum, subthalamic tegmental region, in front of which it is related to substantia innominata of Meinert. The medial surface constitutes the upper part of the lateral wall of the third ventricle and is connected to the corresponding surface of the opposite thalamus by a flattened gray band, the massa intermedia, middle or gray commissure. This mass averages about 1 centimeter in its anterior-posterior diameter. It sometimes consists of 2 parts and occasionally is absent. It contains nerve bundles and nerve fibers. A few of the latter may cross the middle line, but most of them pass towards the middle line and then curve lateralward on the same side. The lateral surface is in contact with a thick band of white substance which forms the occipital part of the internal capsule and separates the thalamus from the lentiform nucleus of the corpus striatum. Structure. The thalamus consists chiefly of gray substance, but its upper surface is covered by a layer of white substance termed the stratum zonale, and its lateral surface by a similar layer termed the lateromedullary lamina. Its gray substance is incompletely subdivided into three parts, anterior, medial, and lateral, by a white layer, the medial medullary lamina. The anterior part comprises the anterior tubercle, the medial part lies next to the lateral wall of the third ventricle, while the lateral and largest part is interposed between the medullary laminae and includes the pulvinar. The lateral part is traversed by numerous fibers which radiate from the thalamus into the internal capsule and pass through the latter into the cerebral cortex. These three parts are built up of numerous nuclei, the connections of many of which are imperfectly known. Connections. The thalamus may be regarded as a large ganglionic mass in which the ascending tracts of the tegmentum and a considerable portion of the fibers of the optic tract end, and from the cells in which numerous fibers, thalamocortical, take origin and radiate to almost every part of the cerebral cortex. The lemniscus, together with other longitudinal strands of the tegmentum, enters its ventral part, the thalamo-mammary fasciculus, bundle of Vic d'Azur, from the corpus mammillare, enters in its anterior tubercle, while many of its fibers of the optic tract terminate in its posterior ends. The thalamus also receives numerous fibers, corticothalamic, from the cells of the cerebral cortex. The fibers that arise from the cells of the thalamus form four principal groups or stalks. A. Those of the anterior stalk pass through the frontal part of the internal capsule to the frontal lobe. B. The fibers of the posterior stalk, optic radiations, arise in the pulvinar and are conveyed through the occipital part of the internal capsule to the occipital lobe. C. The fibers of the inferior stalk leave the under-medial surface of the thalamus and pass beneath the lentiform nucleus to the temporal lobe and insula. D. Those of the parietal stalk pass from the lateral nucleus of the thalamus to the parietal lobe. Fibers also extend from the thalamus into the corpus striatum. Those destined for the caudate nucleus leave the lateral surface, and those from the lentiform nucleus, the inferior surface of the thalamus. The metathalamus comprises the geniculate bodies, which are two in number, a medial and a lateral, on each side. The medial geniculate body, corpus geniculatum mediale, internal geniculate body, post geniculatum, lies under cover of the pulvinar of the thalamus and on the lateral aspect of the corpora quadrigeminum. Oval in shape, with its long axis directed forward and lateralward, it is lighter in color and smaller in size than the lateral. The inferior brachium from the inferior colliculus disappears under cover of it, while from its lateral extremity, a strand of fibers passes to join the optic tract. Entering it are many acoustic fibers from the lateral lemniscus. The medial geniculate bodies are connected with one another by the commissure of Gudin, which passes through the posterior part of the optic chiasma. The lateral geniculate body, corpus geniculatum laterale, external geniculate body, pregeniculatum, is an oval elevation on the lateral part of the posterior end of the thalamus, and is connected with the superior colliculus by the superior brachium. It is of a dark color, and presents a laminated arrangement consisting of alternating layers of gray and white substance. It receives numerous fibers from the optic tract, while other fibers of this tract pass over or through it into the pulvinar. Its cells are large and pigmented. Their axons pass to the visual area in the occipital part of the cerebral cortex. The superior colliculus, the pulvinar, and the lateral geniculate body receive many fibers from the optic tracts, and are therefore intimately connected with sight, constituting what are termed the lower visual centers. Extirpation of the eyes in the newly born animal entails an arrest to the development of these centers, but has no effect on the medial geniculate bodies or on the inferior colliculi. Moreover, the latter are well developed in the mole, an animal in which the superior colliculi are rudimentary. The epithalamus comprises the trigonum habenulae, the pineal body, and the posterior commissure. The trigonum habenulae is a small depressed triangular area situated in front of the superior colliculus and on the lateral aspect of the posterior part of the tinea thalami. It contains a group of nerve cells termed the ganglion habenulae. Fibers enter it from the stalk of the pineal body, and others, forming what is termed the habenula commissure, pass across the middle line to the corresponding ganglion of the opposite side. Most of its fibers are, however, directed downward and form a bundle, the fasciculus retroflexus of Meinert, which passes medially